Greetings, fellow historiophiles and fans of 80s pop music alike. I am the Doug Moore. Welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about the best song ever written about the Cold War, Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire. It's 119 historical mentions cataloged from 1949 to 1989, basically the entire span of the Cold War. Now I'm working on a full-length video going in-depth on each topic, but today we're just going to touch on each one and get familiarized with the song. Without further ado, let's get into Billy Joel's 119 notes on the Cold War. Harry S. Truman started the Cold War all by himself. What a dick. Why'd he do that? Not exactly, but Truman was the president when Billy Joel was born, when this song started, and he did kind of help start the Cold War. He was far less trusting of communists than FDR, and it was his Truman Doctrine calling for the containment of communism, which put us on a direct path of conflict with the Soviet Union for the next 40 years. Doris Day was an immensely popular actress and singer in the 1950s and a quintessential piece of Americana, which means she's a big part of the culture war that was fought silently, intangibly, between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Red China refers to the end of Mao's communist revolution in China and the beginning of formal communist rule in China. Poor China, I'm sorry to hear about that, bud. Johnny Ray was Elvis before Elvis. I don't know why we don't remember him as such today, but he was considered the father of rock and roll. South Pacific was a Broadway musical and comedy about a group of crazy characters on an island after World War II. Walter Winchell was basically the Joe Rogan of his day. He talked about everything and everybody, and people listened when he did. Joe DiMaggio was a prolific baseball player and the receiver of the first $100,000 MLB contract. Joe McCarthy was an absolute lunatic senator from Wisconsin who really hated communists. Richard Nixon is going to appear on this list a few times, but this particular mention is when he is first elected to the Senate in 1952. Studebaker was a car company that went under in the 1950s, helped pave the way for the dominance of the big three in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Televisions make their way into every home, and everybody's living room becomes a little bit more irradiated as a result. The Korean conflict, or war, whatever you want to call it, it kicks off in 1950, kind of the first proxy war that the US and the USSR got involved in. Marilyn Monroe is a famous actress and model who defined the blonde bombshell archetype. Also, she allegedly pioneered Monica Lewinskying before that was cool to do. Rosenbergs were an American couple that were put to death for espionage. The first hydrogen bomb is tested by the United States in the Marshall Islands, making the Cold War just a little bit warmer. Sugar Ray Robinson wins by TKO in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Panmunjom was the site of the peace talks between North and South Korea. It's where we paused the Korean War. That's right, paused. Korean War is still going on today. We never really resolved it. Technically could flare up at any moment, which I think is proof that Asians do everything better. I mean, Christmas, talk about a Cold War. This is gonna take forever at this pace. Let's drink some coffee. Do a little rapid fire. I got my notes down here. Brando gets an Academy Award for his star in A Streetcar Named Desire. The Rodgers and Hammerstein play A King and I is released on Broadway. Catcher in the Rye, the book that killed Lennon. Ackley, you're an absolute prince, is released by J.D. Salinger. Dwight D. Eisenhower is elected president. His vice president is Richard Nixon. Jonas Salk discovers the polio vaccine, and King George VI dies, leading way to Elizabeth II taking the throne of England. Marciano defeats Jersey Joe Walcott. The Liberace show first debuts. Santayana, a Spanish poet and philosopher who gave us those who refuse to remember history are doomed to forget it, and I'm misquoting that there, I apologize. He died. Joseph Stalin dies. He's replaced by Malenkov. That only lasts 6 months. Gamal Nasser takes control of Egypt and proceeds to f*** shit up for like the next 20 or 30 years. Prokofiev is a Soviet composer, Peter and the Wolf, if you've ever heard it, and he represents the USSR's side of the culture war. There are certain things the United States has just never been able to do well. One of those things is fine arts. Traditional painting, traditional compositions. Rockefeller could mean any one of a number of different events during this time period involving the very famous family of the Rockefellers, but Joel himself has specified he's referring to Nelson Rockefeller, the very popular governor of New York State starting in 1957. Roy Campobello was an African-American baseball player who won non-consecutive MVPs in the early 1950s, just 1 year after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. Communist bloc refers to the 1953 East German uprising. It was everybody in East Germany, even those who were in favor of socialism and communism and Stalinism, collectively realizing that socialism, communism, and Stalinism are unbearable to live under. And so they politely went to the Soviets and they said, we're not feeling it. I think we're just gonna go do our own thing. And the Soviets said, bet. Roy Kahn was Joseph McCarthy's right-hand man. Remember him from the first verse, as Joseph McCarthy was accusing basically everyone in the United States of being a communist. Roy Kahn was his legal consigliere. That is until McCarthy talked the blush right off his rose and everybody realized, wait a minute, yeah, communism bad, but this guy is a fucking lunatic. Broad strokes, McCarthy and Cohn go after the US Army. McCarthy gets censured by the Senate, and Cohn quietly retreats from politics and goes back to private practice. Juan Perón was the president of Argentina. He's also the most likely candidate for people who helped the Nazis escape Germany to Argentina. I'm not saying that definitely happened. I'm saying if it did happen, Juan Perón was probably involved. He's also chased out of the country in 1957 via a military coup, though he will return to the country 18 years later to regain the throne. Why do you do stuff like that, South America? If you had to kick him out once, just leave him kicked out. Arturo Toscanini was an Italian conductor who emigrated to the United States when things got melodic in Italy in the 1930s. Once here, he led the NBC Radio Broadcast Orchestra until his death in 1958. Dacron is a synthetic fiber, polyester terephthalate, that was discovered during World War II, and in the early 50s, it was trademarked by DuPont. We've started making clothing and water bottles and single-use containers out of it, and today it makes up about 75% of the microplastics around the globe. Dien Bien Phu falling ended the First Indochina War. It also split Vietnam into North and South, something that I'm sure would have no implications for anyone outside of Vietnam ever. Rock Around the Clock was a song by Billy Haley and the Comets, and if you can think of a more iconic song to represent the 1950s, I am all ears. Einstein dies in a hospital in New Jersey, James Dean dies in a car crash in California, and the Brooklyn Dodgers win their first pennant before being shipped off to California a few years later. Davy Crockett debuts on Disney, though I like to think that Billy Joel was singing about the tactical nuke here. Peter Pan also debuts on Disney and NBC as a live Broadway production. Elvis Presley signs with RCA and starts his hip swing into the history books. That was terrible, I'm sorry, folks. Disneyland opens in Anaheim, California. Bridget Bardot stars in And God Created Woman. The 1953 Hungarian uprising was a bunch of Hungarians saying, hey, the Warsaw Pact sucks, communism sucks, and Soviets suck. Can we possibly just do our own thing? And the Soviets were like, I hear you, no. Some Soviet tanks might have also been involved. Alabama, the Montgomery bus boycotts, that's Rosa Parks, one of the early defining moments in the United States civil rights movement. Nikita Khrushchev gives his secret speech outlining a need for de-Stalinization. He becomes prime minister of the Soviet Union 2 years later. Famous actress Grace Kelly wins the Life Prize twice by first becoming a famous actress and then marrying the Prince of Monaco and becoming a princess. Peyton's Place was a very famous book, kind of scandalous, which became the very first soap opera. It was your grandma's 50 Shades of Grey. You're welcome for that imagery. Trouble in the Suez. There's always trouble in the Suez, but this particular trouble in the Suez was Nasser from a few bars ago. Long story short, and I mean very long story, criminally abbreviated, Nasser gets pissed off at the United States and nationalizes the Suez Canal. So the Brits and kind of the French try to proxy war him, and Russia gets involved, and the US gets in and tells everybody, just fall the f back. We're not doing this, at least not right now. Little Rock refers to the time that Eisenhower had to enact the Insurrection Act of 1807, nationalize the Arkansas National Guard, and send in the Air Force to ensure that African American students were allowed to attend Little Rock Central High School. Boris Pasternak publishes Dr. Virago, which is a critique on the Russian Revolution in Russia. Mickey Mantle is a prolific baseball player who wins 7 pennants for the Yankees. Jack Kerouac publishes On the Road, which became a Bible for the beatnik generation, which led to the hippies, which led to hipsters. So Jesus, thanks a lot, Jack. Sputnik is the first satellite into space. The Reds got it up there, and we absolutely lost our minds over it, but sitting here in 2025, it turned out okay. Zhou Enlai was the Prime Minister of China in 1955. Somebody tried to kill him. He missed a flight, and that flight ended up blowing up. Don't worry, it was not the CIA. I'm telling you, it wasn't the CIA. The CIA had nothing to do with it. We looked into it. It wasn't the CIA. It was the CIA. Bridge Over River Kwai is a movie loosely based on events during World War II. It's your quintessential American war movie. Grab a steak and some whiskey and watch that bad boy. Lebanon is another proxy war. It's one of the first times we sent troops into a Middle Eastern nation to try to solve a problem that we didn't know anything about and ultimately had no business being involved with in the first place. You know, so a good preview of the next 70 years of US foreign policy. Charles de Gaulle is a very famous Frenchman. He was a general during World War II. He led the government in exile, and he becomes the first president of the French Fifth Republic. California baseball, a couple teams from New York, the Giants and the Dodgers, moved out to California, and now we have a truly National League coast to coast. Starkweather homicide is a real messed up one to talk about. This 19-year-old kid goes on a killing spree with his 14-year-old girlfriend in Nebraska. 10 people lost their lives. He got the death penalty. She served like 18 years in prison. Thalidomide is a medical chemical compound that has a wide array of uses. It's been around for well over 75 years, and we've used it for just about everything in that time period. In the 50s, we were giving it to expecting mothers because it was a cure-all for nausea, and it also acted as a sedative to help them sleep. The only problem is it has horrific implications on fetal development. Buddy Holly, the day the music died. Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Richie Valens tragically die in a plane crash. Waylon Jennings was supposed to be on that plane. Ben-Hur is a weird movie with Charlton Heston. Space monkeys refer to the first two monkeys that we sent into space and got back alive. And Mafia is super complex, but it refers to the conviction of a high-ranking mafia official, which kind of confirmed the existence of an international mafia to the public. Hula hoops were extremely popular in the 1950s, and they are still popular today. My 7-year-old has one that she tries to play with every single night. It's super loud, super annoying. Castro wins the Cuban Revolution, installing communism and living happily ever after for, I think, like the next 48 years or something as the leader of Cuba. Edsel was a car that Ford gambled and lost on. We explain more in the main video. In 1960, a U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia, which escalated tensions between the United States and the USSR during the Cold War. Syngman Rhee was the authoritarian yet CIA-backed president of South Korea. At a certain point, they asked him to kindly GTFO, which he did. The CIA rescued his ass and brought him to the United States. Hey, thanks, CIA. I was worried no one was gonna take care of that for us. Payola is a scandal in the music industry where radio DJs were getting paid to play certain songs, and the FCC did what the FCC does and got really pissed off. Kennedy's elected as the 35th president of the United States. More on him in a minute. Chubby Checker popularizes the popular dance The Twist. Psycho is a quintessential movie in the horror genre, released by Alfred Hitchcock. Belgians in the Congo is a colonialism thing. The Belgians were super late to the colonialism party. They didn't start colonizing the Congo until 1880, and they didn't leave the Congo until 1960, which seems like it'd be a good thing because they were terrible to the Congolese people, but unfortunately the power vacuum led to the Congolese crisis of the early 1960s, so Africa's gonna Africa no matter what you do. Hemingway dies while cleaning his gun. Unfortunately. Eichmann is captured in Argentina, probably helped into hiding by Juan Perón, taken to Israel, and given a short drop and a sudden stop for his crimes during the Holocaust. His last words were, "Long live Germany." What a dumb piece of shit. Stranger in a Strange Land is a very popular science fiction novel, the kind of thing George McFly would have read. Bob Dylan becomes popular in the early 1960s and becomes one of the de facto leaders of the 1960s folk hippie counterculture movement. The Berlin Wall is erected in Berlin, answering once and for all the communism question, though for some reason, some of you are still asking it today. I guess that wasn't real communism? Is that what we're going with? The Bay of Pigs invasion occurs, and it was awful for everyone involved. It leads to the direct limitation of the CIA's powers by Kennedy, which may have directly led to the limitation of Kennedy's life by the CIA. Probably not, but you know. Lawrence of Arabia is a quintessential piece of cinema based on the exploits of T.E. Lawrence. In 1964, a quartet of mop-top limeys showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show, and American popular music was never the same. Ole Miss is another time we had to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 to make sure that African-American students could attend the school that they wanted to. This time it was Mississippi State University, and it was JFK enacting, but same outcome. John Glenn is the first American in orbit, and then Liston beats Patterson is another very famous boxing match. Pope Paul VI came to power in 1976 and had a big problem with birth control. Malcolm X, who was originally a member of the Nation of Islam, is a complex and controversial civil rights leader who was unfortunately assassinated by the Nation of Islam after leaving over ideological differences. British politician sex is a super fun one. That's the Profumo incident. A British politician gets caught stooping a showgirl who was also stooping shipping a Soviet official, which is not a good look ever, but during the Cold War, who buddy? JFK blown away, we just talked about it. Who done it? I don't know, maybe it really was just Lee Harvey Oswald. They've released a lot of papers, but the problem with the government is no matter what the government tells me, I've already learned enough about the government to not trust anything the government tells me. It's kind of a catch-22, but this is where we are. Anybody else? Birth control. There's a landmark Supreme Court case that says, yes, if you're married, you have the right to use birth control. Ho Chi Minh is the president of North Vietnam. This mention represents the first time we send troops to South Vietnam to kind of help stabilize the area. I'm sure that won't go poorly for anyone. Richard Nixon becomes the president after Lyndon Johnson takes office after Kennedy's assassination. I don't know why we didn't mention LBJ or his legendary junk in this song, but there we go, now I did. Moonshot, 1969, we land on the moon. There's a good little story about the original moon footage in the full-length video. Woodstock was a concert in upstate New York, 3 days of peace, love, and music. It's kind of the pivotal moment for the hippie counterculture movement. It's not really counterculture after this, it's mainstream culture. Watergate is a political espionage scandal which ends Nixon's run. He has to resign in disgrace. It's also where we get all the gate suffixes for scandals today, which is effing stupid, and I talk about that in the main video too because it drives me nuts. Punk rock kind of fills the void that the hippie folk music left. Now that that's mainstream and more widely accepted, we get punk rock. Begin Mansion takes control of Israel and tries to undo some of the mess that Nasser and others have been doing in the area for the last 20-30 years. He doesn't get particularly far. Reagan takes control in the United States, wins 2 terms, one of the most popular presidents we've ever had. There's always issues in Palestine. We'll go into this more later, but long story short, there's issues in Palestine. Jimmy Carter solves the issues by having some people sign, a ceasefire and an agreement. Everybody applauds Jimmy Carter, and then nothing actually happens. Nobody actually holds up their side of the agreement. There's a parallel there to modern times. You can find it if you're so inclined. Terror on the airlines. 1958 to 1975, there were over 40 major airline hijackings. And the reason is Twitter didn't exist yet. So if you had a new political movement or revolution or something you were against or for or whatever, that's how you got the world's attention. You stole an airplane and they're like, okay, why'd you steal the airplane? Oh, the whales? Okay, give us the plane back and we'll try to save the whales. Deal? It's gonna be hard to believe, but at one point, Iran was led by a secular government and they were a country in the Middle East that most mirrored Western values. But what happened was an Islamic religious clergy known as the Ayatollah took control in Iran, and that's how we get to the Iran that we know and love and bomb and hate today. Specifically here, the Russians are trying to proxy war in Afghanistan to install communism over the religious clergy that is leading there. And what the Russians find out is there is a group of people that hate communists more than Americans and capitalists. Muslims hate communism so fucking much that honestly, you'd think natural allies, but no. Wheel of Fortune debuts. Dr. Sally Ride is the first woman in space, and a quick content warning. Here we go. There are a number of suicides which are linked to heavy metal lyrics, kind of lines up with the satanic panic of the 1980s. Foreign debts is a number of different economic crises that we had in the 1980s, nothing a little Reaganomics can't solve. Homeless vets is the veteran crisis, something I'm not particularly qualified to speak on. My understanding is that while we have made strides, we still fall woefully short of the mark where it comes to honoring and caring for those who have served to protect our freedoms. AIDS is first mentioned, not by name, but in a CDC report. Crack hits the streets, and I guess people enjoy that, and Bernie Goetz murders 4 people on the subway and gets away with it. Hypodermic needles and other medical waste wash up on New Jersey shores. I actually remember this from when I was a kid. I'll tell you the story in a full video. China under martial law. A bunch of Chinese students said, hey, this whole communism thing is ass. Could we get some rights or some freedoms or some better treatment? And the communists said, oh, let me think about that. No! You guys remember Tank Man? I wonder whatever happened to him. Yeah, we know what happened to him. Coke and Pepsi were in the midst of they called them the soda wars, the cola wars. They were literally just trying to outspend each other over that 1% of the population that doesn't already have a lifelong opinion on Coke or Pepsi. And one of the ways they did it was with very famous musicians. Now, Coke had some pretty good ads with Whitney Houston and Paula Abdul, but Pepsi's Michael Jackson ad, that bad boy was on fire. Now, the tragedy of this song, hold on, more coffee. Okay, now the tragedy of this song is that it was released on September 18th, 1989. The Berlin Wall would fall 3 weeks later. on November 9th of the same year. Now, Billy Joel had no way of knowing that the Cold War was almost over. He had no way of knowing that the Berlin Wall was about to fall down. But if he had just waited like 2 months, it could have started with Harry Truman, the guy who dropped the bomb, the guy whose Truman Doctrine put us directly at odds with the Soviet Union, which arguably led to the whole Cold War in the first place. We could start there, and we could have ended on the Berlin Wall falling, which arguably was the beginning of the end for the Cold War. Sadly, Billy didn't know it was coming, so he ended it with Michael Jackson lighting his hair on fire. And that's all there is, folks. Like I said, there's a full-length video coming. We're gonna do a few minutes on each of these events. It's a huge video, but we're putting a lot of time into it. It's gonna be really good, so if you wanna see that, I recommend you subscribe. That way you know you're not gonna miss it. Other than that, me and Mike just wanna wish y'all a happy Halloween. Catch you sometime in November with that full-length video.